Hello, I'm Neil Thind of Arun Associates and London Party Wall Surveyors, and this is Nick Huban of William J. Marshall Structural Engineers and Architects based in central London. Nick is a qualified civil and structural engineer who has been practicing for over 40 years. This is the first of our joint presentations, and we'll be focusing on structural and operational matters relating to loft conversions and how that comes into play under the Party Wall Act. So Nick, I'll fire away with my first question. So how would you say the Party Wall, etc. Act 1996, how does that impact or might impact on loft conversions of non-detached properties? So for example, a semi-detached property or maybe a terrace property. So how does it come into play under the Act then? So if you want to explain that.
One has to first of all work out how the roof structure works. So often in a loft conversion, the idea is to get as much internal space as possible. You're taking away the supports from the roof. You need to understand the roof so you can provide additional supports. One thing people sometimes forget is when you take away the supports holding the roof up, the roof may then start to spread and the eaves might start to move outwards.
Yeah.
This can cause problems to tenants downstairs, to neighbours, especially if you've got a terrace structure. You can actually start putting a shove in the adjoining wall, causing cracking, and those are the problems. So first of all, know your roof, understand it.
You've got to understand your roof, but the importance is also the reason why it comes under the Act is because you're going to be doing works which affect the party structure,
Exactly.
and that could be taking some of those roof supports away from the party wall. So, for example, the loft conversion, quite typically, you're increasing the load on the floor upstairs,
Yes.
within the roof space, and that often means insertion of steel beams, I take it, into a party structure, as well as maybe a roof beam as well to support the loft conversion.
Yes.
So, yeah.
Yes, that's right. Sometimes you have
Yeah.
to put in a new floor structure because the existing joists up in the loft are designed
Yes.
only seem to support, well, not designed to support much at all. The ceiling perhaps a little bit of storage. So you then have to try and fit in a new structure within the depth of the existing floor, and that can be problematic. I saw one case where somebody misjudged it entirely, and sticking out of the roof is a beam end carefully cased in lead because they didn't get the levels quite right and hadn't worked out how to do it.
Right.
So getting the structure right is crucial. Putting in new steels, where you're taking away walls, again, there's an issue. The question of loads on the foundations, because after all you're working at the top, but those loads will end up somewhere. You're putting a new habitable space in place.
Yeah.
So check what loads you're putting down on the foundations. It's a broadly accepted rule of thumb that 10% load onto an existing building, the building isn't really going to notice it. It's within the margin of error of calculations. Right. Building control often accept that without any further calculations or investigations.
Okay, but if, for example, you were to raise the party wall, a typical form of construction is like a mansard roof construction, which is quite typical in some of these inner borough areas of London, like Islington and Camden and Westminster. You're going to be increasing the dead load on the building structure, on the party structure itself.
Exactly.
That's correct.
Yes, by 10-20%, and now you're getting into a problem where you need to justify a wall.
Right.
Both, are the bricks strong enough? Often with Victorian brickwork, you've got the worst bricks used in the party wall because nobody can see them.
Yeah.
The sort of sweepings of the brickyard.
Yeah.
And then the additional load on the foundations.
Yeah.
And that's where it can get very complex because you've got multiple tenancies. Somehow you need to get into the basement or the lower ground floor or whatever and investigate the foundations to prove it.
Right.
And that can be, frankly, challenging. Sometimes it can be a deal breaker.
I can imagine that is yes, for example, it can be quite complex, for example, because, in that situation, how do you check the adequacy of a foundation? You need to get access into, say, a lower basement flat.
Yes.
And how would you go about doing that? To get access, to break up their floor,
Exactly.
to check the adequacy of the depth of the foundation, what sort of foundation it is. That in most cases a deal breaker that wouldn't go through because I cannot imagine any lower flat owner wanting to do that.
No,
To have that exposure in their property.
You have to then step back and say, well, look, how can I raise this with a lightweight construction? And in fact, with modern lightweight constructions, with steel frames with timber is now becoming very fashionable. You can quite often get away with it by cutting the load down.
Yes.
So you now need to think quite hard about what load you're putting on there.
Okay.
And that may involve going back to the planners, changes of material and so on. There are ways around it, but it can be a challenge.
Is there any possibility that maybe, to investigate the depth of a foundation, type of foundation, you quite typically you dig a hole, it's a small hole, like a trial hole.
Yes, that's right.
Next to the party wall itself. Could that be done not within the building, but maybe externally? Maybe at the back of the property.
It's difficult because the real problem, the width of the foundation may well be different to the party wall. Often the party wall is carrying a lot of the load. The front and rear walls may be quite lightly loaded. They'll have bays in, and they will have smaller foundations for reasons of economy.
Right.
It's the party wall where often most of the loads are being carried.
I see.
And that's where you really, really, truly need to get down there and find out what the subsoil's like underneath, how deep the foundations are, how wide they are.
Right, I see.
And it is very, very difficult. There isn't an easy answer.
Okay, because this is a situation where you might consider having to redesign the raising of your party wall, and the party wall Act does give a right to raise the party wall. You can even raise it in timber, or as you said, lightweight construction. But typically, most party wall surveyors, when they look at this, and I know party wall surveyors can't influence design in too big a way, but they'll look at this and they'll think, well, look, can this not be raised in masonry? And most times we would want it raised in, as a party wall surveyor myself for many years, you'd want to see that construction raised in masonry, and not a lightweight construction. This is something for, I suppose, structural engineers to consider.
To advise, and certainly we look at the option. Frankly, we like robustness as engineers. It would be nice to raise it in masonry. The idea is to work with the existing building. You've got a masonry building, it's more sensible to raise it in masonry. Yeah. And sometimes you've got opportunities like light wells and things like that, where you can get access to the foundations within a light well without actually having to disturb the neighbours.
Okay.
So there are possible ways around it, but it requires, frankly, careful consideration and, I think, management of expectations as well from the client.
Also, I suppose if a neighbouring property has had a mansard roof extension, would it be safe to assume that the neighbours had it, it's all right to have it done on my property as well? Similar type of construction, build, age of building, is that an assumption you could make?
It is an assumption, it's likely, but the problem is engineers, we're cautious people, we don't like to work on likelihoods.
Yes.
It may be that if you're just overloading it by a small amount, you may think, okay, well, this is a justifiable risk, but we don't like risks. Okay. We're cautious people. We like to sleep at night. Okay.
So just to go back on that, if you are going to be overloading the foundation, then you need to take corrective measures in place, don't you, to obviously shore up the foundation of the party structure, the party wall.
Yes, that's right. Yeah. And that is classically done by underpinning.
Right. Okay.
To increase the width of the foundations or increase the depth to bring the foundations down onto perhaps more competent ground. Okay. Instead of made ground, you bring it down perhaps to an underlying gravel layer, which we find an awful lot of in London.
Right. Okay, so that does mean excavation in bays underneath the party wall, which has to be very carefully managed,
very carefully programmed
on site, and very carefully programmed on site. It's not a case of digging a big trench underneath the party wall. It would be done in bays and sections. Is that
yes,
would that be
right?
right?
Probably about a metre width, because that's a manageable width. The brickwork will span over a metre.
Okay.
The superstructure without worrying too much.
All right.
I saw it done once where they tried to underpin in one go, and that was quite exciting. Fortunately, the building
the building did stay up then.
It stayed up by hope and habit. The building control officer, I've never seen anyone so nervous in their life.
Oh yeah, I can imagine.
So don't do that. Don't go there.
So Nick, typically with most properties, you would say you wouldn't need to underpin the party structure, the party wall. That won't be necessary.
Yes, normally in roof conversions you're going to try and reuse the existing roof shape as much as possible. Often this is a requirement by the planners, they don't want to alter the shape. You raise the party wall, it's rare, it occurs sometimes in London, but ideally you want to work within the space. You've got a steeply pitched roof, you've got a nice void inside, reuse that. But the trick is to avoid concentrating loads. Distribute the loads around the building so the building doesn't feel it's being altered too much. Don't put concentrated loads in any particular part of the structure, and with luck you'll manage to avoid needing to underpin.
Okay. By concentrated loads, by the insertion of these steel beams, which will take the floor load of the loft conversion, are you not concentrating the load on the party wall where these beams go into the party wall?
You are, but you're...
Interest.
Oh yes, you are, but you're normally 2 or 3 stories up, and loads spread at 45 degrees. So by the time you get down to a story, 2.5 metres down, the load will have spread over perhaps 5 metres of structure. So the loads are being spread. It's only perhaps where you get an internal wall, where you've got staircases, openings, and you may find that a lot of load ends up on a pier in the ground floor. So that's why, and the loads are then concentrated on that one particular element of structure. And this is why, again, you've got to understand the structure, you've got to work out how the forces flow through the structure down to the foundations.
Okay, understood. So, quite typically, these beams will go into a wall. Yeah. There'll be pockets cut into the wall, and the beam goes into the wall, and then normally you'd expect to crush the brick at that point, but the load is spread. And how is it actually spread when the beam actually goes into the wall? How do you allow that spreading to take place?
Basically, you cast a pad stone beneath the beam so that the beam sits on perhaps a couple of bolts holding it in place, some dry pack, and then onto a pad stone which perhaps 2, 3, 4 times the width of the beam. The width of the pad stone is defined by the need to reduce the stresses immediately under the beam to stresses the brickwork can take. And building control officers traditionally have used about 0.4 Newton per square millimetre. It's the crushing strength of an old Victorian brick in lime mortar. It's a default position. It means you don't need to test bricks. Keep the loads down to that sort of level and you won't have any trouble with the brickwork.
Nick, I want to also look at some of the operational aspects of actually carrying out the work itself, because obviously cutting pockets into a, say, solid party wall can be considered quite a risky process, would you say, if it's not done in a proper way. So, just if you can give me some explanation as to how you think that process of doing the actual cutting and putting the beam should be carried out.
Yes, I mean, you should never use percussive tools in the party wall. The vibration cause damage to plasterwork on the other side. It can dislodge neighbours' ornaments and things like that, which has happened before. You need to use rotary tools, disc cutters, things like that. Carefully cut out the brickwork. Often the bricks can be taken out by hand. The mortar is quite loose, old lime mortar is quite soft and can be carefully removed by hand. And the idea is to cut out a nice clean hole with a minimum disturbance. You can then cast your pad stone into the wall. The difficulty, of course, then is when you bring your beam in. The beam has to bear on the pad stone. So if you think about it, if you're spanning between party walls, the beam will be longer than the gap you've got. Yes. So you then need to work out how to support the beam where it bears on the pad stone. Yeah. And a neat trick by doing that is by putting nested channels within the web of the beam on either side. So that gives the extra reach you need to get on the party walls.
So you can imagine if you've got a beam that's got to span the full width of the house from party wall to party wall, you can't just plonk a big beam into place. You're going to have to cut the beam in 2 bits, really, and then splice the two sections of beam together.
Yes, that's right. And again, one needs to be careful where the splice is. One needs to put it at where there's a minimum bending, shall we say, more towards the support. For heaven's sake, don't cut it in the middle.
If you cut it in the middle, there's every possibility it could be doing that. So sort of, under the floor load that's being imposed upon it, yes, under the stresses of that floor load, yeah.
And again, you'll be quite carefully looking at the splice. One doesn't want the contractor to make the splice using normal tolerance holes, for example, where there's a little bit of slot between around the edges of the bolt where it goes through, because they can then slip slightly, and only a millimetre or 2 of drop at the centre of the beam can actually start to cause you problems. Yes. As the splice will be absolutely perfectly structurally sound, but it will now, instead of being straight, it will be structurally sound at a slight dipped angle.
I see.
At which point you might get problems upstairs.
The cutting into the party wall, particularly with old Victorian buildings, for example, there's 9-inch brickwork. Yeah. You've got old bricks, which are generally quite poor bricks, in most cases. They're held together by a very loose, weak mortar.
Yes, that's right.
Now, I've dealt with many a situation, well, not many a situation, but I have dealt with situations where there has been damage caused by that operation of cutting out the pocket.
Yeah.
And I suppose that there is a risk element to that can't be avoided, do you think? Or, I mean, you talked about using non-percussive, like drill
Yes.
bits, and don't have them going into the wall, but you know, it is still a risky operation.
It is
still.
risky, and that's why we
Yes.
have to prepare the schedule conditions on the other side, because there is
Yes.
there is a risk of causing damage. But
Right.
with a competent contractor taking care, knowing the problem, knowing what he's got to do, being aware of the existing brickwork,
Yes.
that sometimes you can actually lift the bricks out at times because
Yes.
the mortar's so soft, which isn't an issue. They're perfectly strong enough in situ.
Yeah.
I wanted to show you just an image of party structure here.
Which is a party wall, old Victorian building. And this is an example. You can see the bulge in the wall and you can see the cracking around it. And,
Yeah.
and that is where the beam end has been just gone a bit too far into the wall. And really the beam end shouldn't go more than half the thickness of the wall. You'd say that really should be, you know.
Absolutely, yes, the
you know,
centre line of the wall.
The centre line of the wall.
Yes.
So, you know, it's not to say you can't go further because the party wall is shared between two neighbours, you can.
Yeah.
But from an operational viewpoint, you're putting at risk the damage to the other neighbour's property.
That's right.
In that way there you see the need for plaster repair and decoration.
Yes, and that can sometimes be simply careless when they install the beam. Remember, the beam is being brought in probably on blocks and tackles and swung into position. If they're not careful and swing the beam in a little too enthusiastically, it will thump the wall at the end of its bearing.
Yes.
And that can cause that sort of damage.
And that can cause that sort of damage.
A simple one-off damage,
Yeah.
but it's carelessness.
Yes.
You know, with nested channels, an example like that, the beam is put into position clear of the wall by perhaps an inch or two, and then you can simply put your channels in, and there's less risk of causing damage by impact of the beam. Because it's a cumbersome thing, a difficult thing to handle in the confined spaces of a building.
It is, and you know, I will say to building owners, building owners, I suppose building owners are very much constrained by how good their contractors are. So it very much depends on the competence of the contractor, which you as a building owner, you have to invest in having a good competent contractor to do these sort of works.
And you
Yeah.
do, you know, paying
Yeah.
the money, it frankly saves money in the long term.
It does, because you have a situation like this. I mean, this will involve repair, redecoration, and cost for a building owner,
Yes,
and that should be avoided at all costs.
exactly.
Yeah.
The neighbour will get a fully redecorated room probably.
Yes.
Because you won't be able to patch in the decorations. You have to
Yes.
decorate the whole room. Possibly, especially if it's an older building, you might have caused consequential damage to plaster around. Although you've got an impact there, you might have loosened the plaster of quite an area around now.
Absolutely.
With a thump behind.
Absolutely.
And suddenly you're talking about replastering half a wall.
Yes.
So,
Yes. Yeah. Absolutely. Other issues that need to be considered are, for example, a situation where you shouldn't be cutting into flues or into chimney breasts. Is that right? With your beams, that should be avoided at all costs. Would you say?
You can avoid it. Yes, you should try and avoid it. But the problem with London buildings is that in days before central heating, every room had a fireplace.
Yes.
And down in the lower ground floor, that's fine. Perhaps you've got 4 now flues, because each fireplace has a flue.
Yes.
A 4-storey building, 2 fireplaces per floor. You've now got 8 flues coming up at the top. And you look at the party wall in London buildings, and you see a whole row of flues along the party wall.
That's right.
And if you're working the higher part of the building, there's no way you can avoid that. You have to build into the flue, but to take your brickwork, you take your structure at the edge of the flue. And so you'll then need perhaps a blocking piece, perhaps slate, a non-combustible material,
Sure.
to close off your pockets now, because
Okay.
you've only got 4.5 inches of skin there.
So you have 4.5 inches of brickwork before you actually hit the flue, basically.
Yes, yeah, exactly.
I come across situations normally as a part also. I see this, but I would flag it up as a potential area of risk and concern.
Yeah.
And it could be designed out maybe with having a steel column that will take the load from the actual beam.
Yes.
So the beam goes into the chimney breast, the face of the chimney breast wall, and then there is a column or post that then transfers the load down to another beam.
Yes, absolutely. And
You know, so you can perhaps design that particular problem out. I'm just thinking, yeah.
if the client's happy with that, sadly one often gets kickback from the client because the client wants this beautifully open space,
Yeah.
and one then objects to a column or a pier. But certainly in terms of, in structural terms, if the client can accept that, or if it can be as well concealed architecturally, then it's by far the better solution.
Yes.
To stay away from the party wall.
Okay.
It reduces risk.
Something else, just on the operational side, because you could potentially be affecting flues, and you're going into party structure, flues get disturbed. There's a possibility of soot coming down flues, would you say, and maybe going into neighbouring properties through fireplaces or perhaps through vents that are fitted into the chimney breast walls.
Absolutely.
So there is the risk there, and would you say what is quite wise, and we certainly stipulate this within the awards that we do here, is that you should seal around the vent openings within the chimney breasts.
Yeah, very much so.
Prior to any work starting. Yeah.
The trick is to find it.
Yeah.
When you're at the top of a building with perhaps 16 flues, and you're going towards the top of the building, going into one flue, where does that come out of the bottom? And you actually end up dropping ping pong balls down the flue to find out where it comes out.
Yes.
Or lighting little smudge flyers in flues down below you to see where the smoke's coming out. Because sometimes it's actually extraordinarily difficult to find out where this flue is connected
where this flue is connected to. But generally speaking, if you're carrying out works in close vicinity, and there might be a number of flues affected,
Yeah.
if you have to take into consideration as the building owner and their contractor, all the fireplaces and all the vent openings on the neighbour side of the party wall and the adjoining owner side of the party wall, that could be affected by this building operation, you'd say.
Yes, that's right. It can be quite a nightmare. Though
Yes.
fortunately, it normally happens within your building, because the fireplaces will serve one side of the building. If you look, you see the chimneys are right the way across. They will normally serve one property. For example, looking at the front of the building, the left-hand wall will have the fireplaces for your building.
Yeah.
The right-hand wall will have the fireplaces and the flues for the neighbour's building.
Yeah.
So you're probably going to be working with your own building most of the time, but that doesn't help if you've got tenants in the lower floors, because they'll need to be made aware of the works.
Yes.
And they will have to have sometimes their chimneys sealed off.
Yeah. So you could be a leaseholder. You could be having your own flat.
Yeah.
You'll have flat owners above and below, all of which could be potentially, well, sorry, I'm talking, we're not going chimney breast removal, we're talking about loft conversion. So you're on the back, you're on the top floor.
Yeah.
Okay. So you're going to have a situation where, tenants below, leaseholders below could be affected by your works. Not just the neighbour next door, but also the owners below.
Exactly.
Or the tenants below by the work you're doing. So I would imagine it is quite you have to really think with some due diligence. This is the contractor in terms of what they're doing, and obviously have these precautionary measures put in place beforehand.
And the contract administrator, long before that happens, before the contractor gets on site, the contract administrator, whoever was running it, the architect, perhaps an engineer, a surveyor, will have to have thought all these problems through.
Yeah.
And we'll have to then, there will be probably a bit of non-structural political negotiations going on about how to keep all the tenants on board and to avoid upsetting them.
Yeah.
Because London, there are many, many houses with multiple tenancies.
Thank you, Nick, for that comprehensive and valuable guidance. Thank you.
Thank you. Interesting.
Thanks. Thank you for watching. This has been brought to you by Arun Associates and William J. Marshall. We hope to be making further presentations to you in the near future. Finally, if you are planning any building works to your property or to a leased property, you will need to comply with building regulations and acquire the necessary consents.